Hi, Professor GOFFI. How are you doing, my friend? Can you hear me? Professor GOFFI, can you hear me? Hi, Paulo. How are you doing? Guess you're connected so far. Oh yes, now you're on. Como é que você está, Paulo? Tudo bem?
Como vai? Tudo bem?
Tudo, querido. Você, firme?
Firme, firme e forte.
Graças a Deus.
Good afternoon, Professor Manuel and Victor Morales.
Yeah. Vamos aguardando um pouquinho mais os demais convidados, beleza. A gente já dá início.
Beleza.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon.
Hi, Professor.
Hi.
Hi. Let me see who. Oh, minha. ¿Qué tal, amiga? ¿Estás bien?
Thiago.
Buenos días, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, ¿y tú?
Muy bien, muy bien. ¿Cómo está su hija? ¿Totalmente recuperada?
Totalmente recuperada, gracias. Sí, todo perfecto ya.
Fantástico, amiga. Mucho gusto.
Igual.
¿Qué horas son ahora ¿dónde estás, amiga?
En México ahorita son las 11 de la mañana, temprano.
Certo. Victor Damasceno, muito boa tarde. Verifica, por favor, se o problema do áudio foi resolvido? Ou continua duplicado? Alguém está presenciando esse problema?
Aqui está perfeito.
Ô, Marcos, boa tarde. Como vai, meu amigo?
Oi, querido, tudo bem?
Bom, seja bem-vindo. Como vai, Diego? Boa tarde, tudo bem?
Olá, Thiago, tudo bem? Boa tarde. Boa
Seja
tarde a
bem-vindo.
todos. Obrigado.
O pessoal do YouTube está dizendo que está normalizado, acho que é questão do áudio. Deve ter dado algum problema, o aberto simultaneamente. Maravilha, pessoal, agradeço mesmo. Já vamos então dando início, já vamos começando, já pontualmente às 2 horas, só verificando os nossos próximos convidados. Obrigado pelo aviso, viu, Vitor? Sem problema. Se não conseguir não tiver dificuldade, não conseguir superar, por favor, me avisa para a gente poder tentar ver como a gente consegue auxiliar. Aos amigos que estão Enlighten Brasil, Sidney Siqueira, muito boa tarde. Fernando, Poliana, Giovana, muito boa tarde. Sejam bem-vindos. Já vamos dando início aos nossos trabalhos. Boa tarde, Felipe. Boa tarde, Poliana, mais uma vez. Well, good afternoon to everyone. So we are going to begin our conference, our talk. I'd like to extend my most sincere gratitude to everyone who is now listening. And thank you very much for the audience. Thank you very much for all members here present to accept this invitation. I know it's hard on a Saturday be here, but I'm terrific. It's terrific to be here with such a fantastic group of researchers like yourself. Thank you very much to you all, my dear friends. Well, we're going to get started. Professor Zélia now is connecting, and there is a few members that are not present so far, but let me make some introductions and explain briefly what this event is all about. First, it's quite important that I'd like to say that that is very, very significant to all us, to all your presence here. I'd like to thank you very much, every one of you who are now present here with us. And this event came, the idea of this event came as an exchange of messages between Professor GOFFI and me, and it reveals it in a certain way, a fantastic aspect of social networks and naturally, of course, AI. Without AI, we couldn't be here probably because we could not know each other through social network, social media. So there is some fantastic aspects of these matters. And this event came as a jointly cooperation between CEST, Society and Technology Study Center from Polytechnical School of USP, University of São Paulo, and Mackenzie Presbyterian University, both, I guess, one of the major universities here in Brazil. And I'm so grateful for those both institutions who believe in this work, who make some efforts to make this event happen. And I'd like also, naturally, to thank all the members of the scientific committee who allow this event also to happen. I'd like to mention every one of them. Professor Edison Spina, Ph.D., Professor Fábio Ramazzini Bechara, Ph.D., Professor Felipe Chiarello de Souza Pinto, Ph.D., Professor Gianpaolo Poggio Ismanio, Ph.D., Professor Juliana Bruso Florencio, Ph.D., Professor Marco Aurelio Pinto Florencio Filho, Ph.D., myself, Professor Vera Queiroz, Ph.D., Professor Zélia Luisa Pierdoná, Ph.D., and also to our dear friends, Professor Lara Rocha Garcia, Professor Patrici Bertelli Zanon, and Professor Diego Almada. To everyone, my most sincere, once more, gratitude. Briefly introducing, I guess, should have you know what is CEST. CEST is a study group created and connected with Polytechnical School, which has the singular purpose to understand, to study naturally some aspects of technology and its application on society. This group was once created to an import from Microsoft, and now are still I guess, more than 15 years or so, or approximately like this. We are now currently studying most of the aspects in the several areas, since engineering, law are the most significant aspects of it. And this study group that I'm part of, make efforts with Mackenzie Presbyterian School, in which I have the most high values. I am doctoral in law by Mackenzie, and they're both engaged on this study. I'm so grateful for those both institutions. And I don't know if Professor Zélia would bring a word to present Mackenzie. Professora Zélia, eu não sei se você gostaria de fazer uma breve apresentação do Mackenzie. Muito boa tarde, professora, seja muito bem-vinda. Pelo que eu me lembro, acho que vai ser a senhora a fazer essa apresentação. Gostaria de ter a palavra?
Sim, eu vou falar em português e daí eu gostaria que você fizesse a tradução, especialmente para o professor EMMANUEL. Tá? Minhas palavras iniciais são de agradecimento pela organização do evento, né, que essa organização é da CEST, da USP, e da universidade que eu estou representando aqui, a Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie. Faço esses agradecimentos a todos os organizadores, Thiago, eu faço em teu nome, né, mas quero contemplar todos que participaram da organização do evento. E quero também cumprimentar cada um dos professores que vão participar esta tarde, né, o professor EMMANUEL, a professora Wendolyn, professora Paula, o professor Marcos, o professor Paulo Campanha, né, o Diego, que também participou, que é nosso doutorando do Mackenzie, nosso mestrando do Mackenzie, aluno do estrito sensu, e dizer que é uma alegria para o Mackenzie participar dessa organização que traz uma temática tão importante. Assim, a academia, no meu entendimento, precisa se debruçar para os desafios que a inteligência artificial tem apresentado e que continuará apresentando. Gostaria, Thiago, que você fizesse, então, em inglês, essas considerações, mas quero, assim, em nome do Mackenzie, agradecer a oportunidade e de poder participar, mas também, né, agradecer a cada um dos participantes desta tarde por estar dedicando parte de seu tempo para um evento organizado também pelo Mackenzie. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, professora Zélia. I'll now try to translate this to English. Professor Zélia represents Mackenzie Presbyterian School, University, and Professor Zélia wish to say their most sincere gratitude to everyone who is involved in this event in the name of the Mackenzie Presbyterian School. She's so happy that everyone, she and Mackenzie are so happy that everyone here is committed to the commitment of making science, making studies on a Saturday. We know all it's a day off that we have, but we are now here dedicating this to this event. And she also like to say, especially to Professor Emmanuel GOFFI and to everyone who is here presenting the thematics of this work. She mentioned Professor Marcos, Professor PAOLA, Professor PAULO, Professor FLAVIO, Professor Wendolynne, and naturally Diego, who had helped quite much in the organization of this event. Muito obrigado, professora Zélia. Thank you all. And...
Eu só ratifico que, além, né, representando o Mackenzie hoje, além da minha pessoa, tem o professor Flávio e também, né, o nosso aluno do estrito sensu, o Diego, que está aqui presente. E o Thiago não deixa de ser, né, porque quem fez doutorado numa instituição vai ser sempre mackenzista, né? Então, quero dizer que estamos em 4 aqui representando o Mackenzie. Obrigada.
É verdade. She now says that she wants to once more to extend that Professor Flavio, she herself, and Diego are both members of Mackenzie. Professor Zélia and Professor Flavio teach law in Mackenzie, and Diego is now member of the master's studying master candidate on Mackenzie, which is fantastic. And as I mentioned myself, I was Ph.D. I had my Ph.D. In law by Mackenzie, and we are all members of this fantastic institution. I'm so proud of it. And Professor Zélia also, and everyone are proud of this commitment and this engagement of this institution. Thank you very much. Obrigado, professora. Let's go. If you all allowed me, I'd like to present all the members of the round table and presentations here and today present. And the first member of this conference is Professor Dr. Emmanuel GOFFI. Professor Dr. Emmanuel GOFFI, he is a philosopher of technology and co-director and co-founder of Global AI Ethics Institute. He is a researcher and associate with both Big Data Lab and Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany, and also the Center for Defense and Security Studies in Winnipeg, Canada. He served in Air Force, French Air Force, for 27 years. He's former director of Observatory on Ethics and Artificial Intelligence on Sapiens in Paris. His academic career is made of experience in French, Canada, and Germany, where he has been teaching and doing research in IR and ethics over the 15 years. He is still solicited to teach and give conferences around the world. Professor Emmanuel holds Ph.D. in social science from Science POLI. I'm not sure if that's correct, Professor Emmanuel. Once more, thank you very much for your presence. And also here with Professor Emmanuel, we have Professor Dr. Paola Cantarini. She's a lawyer and also professor and researcher. She has completed postdoctoral studies in philosophy and arts and critical thinking at European Graduate School in Sweden and also at CEST, University of Coimbra. And she has completed also postdoctoral studies at Universidade of São Paulo University, and in philosophy and TGD. She is a PhD and master's degree in law by Pontifícia Universidade Católica de São Paulo Pontifical Catholic University, and also PhD in philosophy of law, jurisprudence at Unisalento. She was researcher at University of Lisbon, Portugal, and visiting teacher at University of Reggio Calabria, in which she's also now current and postdoctoral stage with all us. Thank you, Professor Paola. Professor Dr. WENDOLYNE NAVA, she is a professor of law at Universidade Autônoma de Cidade de Juarez, Cira Juarez. She's PhD in law by University of Barcelona. She's also master's in law by University of Barcelona. She's a specialist in law also by University of Barcelona. She's graduated in law by Universidade Autônoma de Cidade Juarez, Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez. Gracias, amiga. Mucho gusto tenerte acá con nosotros. Professor Dr. Flávio de Leão Bastos Pereira. He is a professor of human rights and constitutional law at Mackenzie Presbyterian University, as mentioned before. He has completed postdoctoral studies at Mediterranean International Center for Human Rights Research. Like everyone here, Professor Flavio is also current in this stage. His PhD in law by Universidade Presbyteriana Mackenzie, in which he has also masters. He is a specialist in law by University of Coimbra and consultant member of International Nuremberg Principles Academy, among other prestigious institutions. Thank you very much, Professor Flavio, for being here with us. Muito obrigado, meu amigo. Professor Marcos Jorge CATALAN, his professor and PhD and masters by society courses at Unisalis. He is visiting scholar in the Instituto Universitário de Arquitetura de Veneza, Instituto Universitário de Arquitetura de Veneza. He has completed postdoctoral studies at Faculdade de Troyes de la Universidade, Faculdade de Direito, Universidade de Barcelona. And he is PhD in law by Faculdade de Direito da Universidade de São Paulo University, and he's also master's degree by State University of Londrina. He's graduated in law by University of Maringá. He's visiting professor in several different countries, including Uruguay, Grenada, and Cordoba. Thank you very much, my dear friend, Professor Marcos. I guess I misspelled the university in Barcelona, but everything is all right. Thank you very much, Professor Marcos, for being here with us. And finally, no finally yet, but also Professor Zélia Pierdoná is here with us. Professor Zélia Pierdoná, she is a PhD and master's in politics and economic law by Mackenzie Presbyterian School. She's a federal prosecutor, and she's postdoctoral by University Complutense de Madrid. She's also Ph.D. in law by Mackenzie, as I've mentioned. Thank you very much, my dear friend, Professor Zélia. Muito obrigado, minha amiga, por estar conosco mais uma vez. And finally, Professor PAULO Campanha Santana. He's a professor of Masters in Labor and Social Relations in the law program, and he is also coordinator of the law course of Centro Universitário do Distrito Federal. He's a lawyer, and now currently is in postdoctoral program in new technologies by Mediterranean International Center for Human Rights Research, as all we are. He is also PhD and Masters in Law and Military Operations. He is graduated in Science, Military Science, and in Law. Professor Paulo, thank you very much. Muito obrigado, meu amigo, for being here with us. And now, finally, I'd like to invite the first round performed by Professor EMMANUEL GOFFI for open this conference, open the speech, this conference, and make this his exposition. Professor EMMANUEL GOFFI will share with us some thoughts and some ideas about the main thematics of this conference, which is naturally artificial intelligence and its connection with ethics and with law. Professor GOFFI, thank you very much for being here with us. Je suis très honoré que vous ayez accepté l'invitation, mon cher ami, d'avance. Merci. You have the spot, my friend. Thank you very much.
Merci, Thiago. Thank you very much. I'm really proud to be here with you, and especially because I wanted to start saying that we do not hear that much about AI ethics from from Southern America. So I'm really thrilled. I've seen that. I think it is today that the Brazilian strategy for AI has just been released. So hopefully it will be available in English. Not sure of that because I cannot read Portuguese. Maybe I have to learn Portuguese. I know that, but I don't have that much time. But I hope it will be available in English. So thank you so much for having me today with you all. I'm really honored to be part of this conference. So yeah, I just wanted to actually offer you some thoughts regarding my work on AI ethics, basically, because once again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a philosopher. So my knowledge in law is pretty limited. I have to admit that, and I would not definitely say I'm good in law, looking at all these panelists that are specialists in the field. But some points that I wanted to share with you, and maybe that can be related to legal issues. What I really want to tell you is that there is kind of a huge narrative about AI ethics that has been built throughout this, let's say, 10 past years. And I'm pretty concerned about the fact that these narratives has been imposed to the whole world without anyone questioning the legitimacy of these narratives. First thing, we're all talking about AI ethics, obviously, but the first thing that I want to stress is that none of us is really able to define what is artificial intelligence or what is ethics. And that makes, obviously, it's very complex because when we're talking about AI ethics, at the very end, we don't really know what we're talking about, right? So we are using the same words. We don't know what we put behind those words, and that's really problematic. So this narrative that has been built around AI ethics, and this is my point, has been mainly built by the West. Let's say the West at large. I know that it's really encompassing. It does not really represent anything real, but you know that we used to make this difference between the West and the East and the North and the South, right? And I would say that, let's say, the European Union and Northern America have created this narrative about AI ethics, right? And what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, based on, and I would really insist on that, and I know that some people do not want to hear that, but that's the reality, based on concerns that are really Western focused. If we look, for example, at biases, right, and we've heard about biases a lot of time. So biases are not acceptable when we look at AI ethics, and we try to create algorithms that are well freed from biases, right? First, I would think that it's something a little bit weird, because we all know that human beings our minds are working on biases, right? Biases are everywhere all the time. But my point would be, let's say that we focus on biases based on gender or skin colors, right? It is clear, if you look at the whole world, that these kind of concerns are not shared by all the people in all the world. If you go to China, if you go to Saudi Arabia, this kind of things will not really make sense, right? It doesn't mean that we have to say that it's right or wrong. That's not my point. I do not have to take a stance. I'm just stressing the fact that the concern that we have and the solution that we're trying to provide are really related to a specific culture, a specific point of view regarding, for example, relation between women and men, right? So the point is not to say, once again, that it's not acceptable. It's to say that imposing this perspective upon the rest of the world might be problematic on the ethical stance, right? We are all, again, biases, but what I'm seeing today is a really strong Western bias in the way we appraise AI and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I'm extensively working with people from all around the world, seriously, and I feel like some of them, look at China, if you look at India, if you look at Latin America, if you look at some places in the Middle East, they have a say. We might not agree with them. That's not the point. But that does not mean that they must not tell what they think about AI ethics, right? They have a say. This is a right. And this is something that is definitely related to those of you that are specialists in the law, is that there are treaties, international treaties, that recognize the right for cultural diversity, right? This is enshrined in the UN Charter. This is enshrined in the Universal Rights. This is also enshrined in the Universal Right for Diversity that has been issued by the UNESCO in 2001. So this is a right, and as soon as we've signed those treaties, as soon as we accepted those treaties, we have to respect them, right? So we have to respect this cultural diversity, meaning that we have to accept to hear even those people that we do not agree with, right? That is where we can build a strong debate, right? And I think that's really important, because most of the time, and this is a Western perspective that is not universally shared, is that we have shared values, universally shared values, right? And I really insist on this word, universal. I know that a lot of people are universalists in their perspective on AI or international relation or ethics or whatever. My point is that universal means universal, everywhere by everyone, right? So far, there is no proof that there is any kind of universal value that is shared by the whole world, right? That's something that we have to really take into account. If we start with the idea that ethics is based on values, and if we agree that there is no universal value, then we have to agree that there cannot be any kind of ethics or universal ethics. So we cannot reach a point where we will have this kind of universal code of ethics saying what is acceptable and what is not when it comes to artificial intelligence. So what I'm seeing today, and this is something, it's not only me, right? It's also something that you will find, interestingly, in a paper that has been written by the IEEE, you know, this certification agency institute, saying that there is a Western hegemony on the ethical norms that are applied to artificial intelligence. So there is really a need to question all the narratives that is behind that. What is artificial, philosophically speaking, and I think that legally speaking, that's something that we need to question. I don't know what exactly is artificial. This is really difficult to define. What is intelligence? Who knows what intelligence is exactly? What is ethics, and what kind of ethics do we have to apply? These are some of the questions that we really have to question. we also have to question lots of things. I'm working currently on ethical standardization of AI, and what I'm discovering is the complexity of the wording of the European Union regarding AI, with a lot of words that are really loosely defined, right? But that are shaping the way we think about AI, and that are shaping our behaviors toward AI. And the most illustrative point of that is the use of trustworthy AI. So just for us to be clear about that, when we say that we have to trust AI, that would mean that AI is autonomous enough to have potentially bad intention. So maybe I can trust it, or maybe I cannot trust it. Paradoxically, what we're saying in the West is that autonomous AI does not exist, because we are still in control, because there will always be human being in control, monitoring this system, right? So there is no way that we could trust AI. We can trust people that are behind AI, for sure. We can trust the programmers, we can trust the deployers, we can trust the users, but AI per se is not trustable, right? So speaking about trustworthiness, or AI trustworthiness, is just kind of a communication tool, just asking people to trust something, because lots of people that are behind that, what we call the norms entrepreneurs, want people to adopt AI, to buy AI, right? To have this AI in their everyday life. So we have to create this trust, but it is something that is really artificial, actually, that trustworthy AI does not exist. When we talk about responsible AI, and I think you would have lots of things to say, legally speaking, about responsible AI. AI cannot be responsible. People can be responsible for what they're doing and what they're developing. But AI itself, it's nothing. It's just a tool for the moment, right? And until it will become, I don't know, maybe autonomous enough to be held responsible for anything, right? So all those words must be questioned. First thing. Second thing, if we want to question those words, those concepts, and the narrative around ethics, we need to open our mind to new perspectives. So far, the West has appraised AI through the main three theories of ethics that are continental ethics, namely consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics, with a strong focus on a really poorly understood deontology, which is a top-down process saying there are rules, you have to apply them, and there is no way for you not to abide by those rules, which is definitely not deontology in the Kantian sense, right? That's totally different. But even if we accept that we are using those three theories, there are many other perspectives. You can look at different papers, different documents that have been written in ethics. Let's just say Feminist Ethics by Carol Gilligan, The Ethics of Care, really interesting because it just brings back ethics to its roots, which is being a mediator between people, right? Just trying to create links between people in order to have harmonious communities working together. So feminist ethics should be somewhere in the debate. It's not. If you look at Hans Jonas with the imperative or responsibility, it's really important to think with Hans Jonas that we have a responsibility toward the future. So our decision, the decision that we're making today, will have an impact on future generations. So where is that responsibility? What is that responsibility? How could we avoid having a world that will be invaded by artificial intelligence, right? We also could refer to Hannah Arendt's work on dictatorship and collective and individual responsibility here. And if we broaden the scope of the perspective, I think, and that's the strongest point I wanted to offer you, is that we have to look at perspectives that are non-Western perspective. When you work with people from China, obviously you can think whatever you want about the political system of China, but that's not the point here. The point is to accept that China, whoever Chinese are, they have a right to have a different perspective on what ethics is, based on the fact that their mindset is built on Confucian perspectives, which is a collectivist perspective, which is really different from the West, where we're really individualistic. right? So you have to accept that. You have to accept that those people. I've recently read a really interesting academic paper about what Buddhism could bring to the debate on AI, and I've discovered, for example, that we are in the West saying that we have to protect data privacy. Data privacy is really important for all of us, right? And we're trying to spread that all around the world. But if you look at that from the Buddhist perspective or from any kind of collectivist perspective, people would say that for the Buddhist perspective, the self does not exist. So individuals do not exist in the same sense as we understand individuals in the West, meaning that privacy does not have the same sense as it could have in the West, because privacy is related to individuals and to the rights that are granted to individuals. So individuals, if they do not exist because the self does not exist, it means that data privacy does not make any kind of sense. So when you understand that, and I'm just saying that in a very superficial way, right? You really have to read this paper because it's really interesting, but you have to understand why, for example, the Chinese do not really care about data privacy and why they do not really understand what we mean by data privacy, right? And once again, we have to make a big difference between our opinion on their political system and the fact that they have a right to cultural differences. These are two different things, right? You can look at Buddhism, you can look at Shintoism, you can look at African wisdoms like Ubuntu, for example, right? And you will, if you can bring that to the debate, we will open new perspectives and we will understand that the world is not only limited to Western perspective and Western concerns. And that's really important. Why do I say that? Because for anyone who has worked in the diplomatic arena, we know that diplomacy is really, really important. And what my experience working, I was in the military working on lethal autonomous weapons with the UN, for example. What I've seen, a lot of people did agree when we were around the diplomatic table, right? You nod, you say yes, because that's diplomacy. But once back home, you just look at your interests and then you adjust all the things that you say to your vested interest, meaning that the application of the rules that you agree on will differ in a way that is really important from other countries. If you look at international relations and conflicts, and if you look at how the Geneva Convention are applied on the field, you will see that there is a big gap between diplomacy agreeing on agreement and the way we behave in a specific case with this agreement, right? And what we are seeing today, and I was saying that about diversity, is that we all praise diversity. We all feel like diversity is the richness of the world, right? It's really important. We agree that diversity is there. But at the same time, when it comes to apply that diversity, when it comes to agree with that diversity, there is kind of a strong reluctance because our mindset is made in a way that we accept diversity as long as it remains in a really narrow perspective, which is our perspective. As soon as you go outside of this perspective, people do not understand and they fear, right, diversity. They fear what they call difference. It's no longer diversity, it's difference. And difference is something that is really concerning. So I do believe that there is a strong work to do, having all those people around the table, discussing with them, learning to listen, which does not mean that you have to agree with. It just means that you have to listen, to try to understand what are the roots of this or that behavior, right? I don't feel, I'm French, I don't feel like, for example, France has any kind of legitimacy to lecture China. If you look at our history, we've done things that were at least as bad as what China is doing, right? So we are not here to lecture or to give, our perspective on ethics. We have to exchange, and especially with countries like China or India that are really huge power. You cannot lecture those countries. And I don't know if you've heard about what recently happened in Anchorage between the US and China. There has been a strong exchange between the two countries regarding, and China was asserting that the US does not represent the world, and that the US does not represent any kind of universal values, that the democracy the way it is applied in the US is not universal, right? So China is slowly, and because they want to be the leader in AI by 2030, they're slowly beginning to just, express the fact that they are a power, and they do not want to be lectured by the West. This is really important, because if we're not able to listen at some point, there will be tensions. And if there is tensions, who knows what will happen? And we will not find any kind of compromise. We have to learn to listen to other perspectives. And even when you're talking with people that you don't agree with, I can tell you for sure that you learn from them. You will learn from those people. And at the very end, what will happen is that you will maybe find a compromise. And instead of having people that will lead the table and do whatever they want back home, maybe you will have a consensus. And maybe people will go back home saying, okay, I have been heard. I have been heard. I've not been lectured. I have been heard. I had a say. And what I've said has been taken into account by the international community. And this is really important. There are some places like in New Zealand where they actually took that into account, adding to their strategy the Maori culture. And if you go to Canada, if you go to the US, you also have some wisdoms coming from the First Nations people that are really interesting, because their relation to the universe, to nature, and to human beings is really different than the one that we have. And they can bring something to this debate that we have on AI ethics. And I really think that we need something new. We really need to revitalize this debate, because so far what I can see is that even if we pretend to have a universal code for ethics, we have actually multiplied the codes of ethics. You've certainly heard about this paper that has been written by the ETH Zurich, where they actually identified 1,180 codes of ethics. That's just crazy. I mean, too many codes of ethics is killing codes of ethics, right? I don't see what's the point with having more than 1,000 codes of ethics, while in the West, we're pretending that we can reach a universal code of ethics, right? So we are, I think, in a dead end with the Western perspective. So we need new perspective. We need new thoughts. We need new people that will bring new ideas to the debate in order to find maybe something like a compromise. But this is a personal opinion. We have to avoid what I call moral absolutism, which would lead to kind of a universal code of ethics that most of the country would sign, but most of the country would not apply on the field, right? That would not make sense. This moral absolutism is really a big issue. This is something that is related for any philosophers who worked on Kantian philosophy. We know that this is a risk with the ontology. Moral absolutism is really, really dangerous, right? So we have to avoid that. So my point is, we really have to open the debate. That's the first thing that we really need to know. We need to learn how to listen to people, even when we do not agree with them. The other point I wanted to share with you is that we also have to think that ethics is only one step towards laws. Ethics itself cannot frame AI. It's too flexible. There is no legal or no formal sanctions with ethics, right? It's all about symbolic sanction. If we want to frame AI, we need legal instruments. Obviously, that's difficult because legal instruments are really, time consuming. If you want to create them, it takes time. And once they are set, maybe the new technology will not fit into your legal instruments, right? But that doesn't mean that we should not try to have this kind of legal instruments. It's also difficult because we all know that behind artificial intelligence, there are lots of things that are at stake: diplomatic, financial, education, military, etc. Things that are behind that, right? If you only look at economy, some studies are just saying that obviously China or the US, we will be the first beneficiaries of the benefits that will come from AI. So those countries, France also, are not really keen on being constrained by legal norms, right? It's not really interesting for us to know that we will not be able to do whatever it takes to benefits from AI and all the product that will be developed. If you look at the European regulation, I think that's the most interesting point, because on the one hand, the European Union is trying to present itself as a normative power, saying we need ethical AI. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Ethical AI doesn't make sense, but let's say that. But on the other hand, if you look at the European strategy, if you look at the European white paper on AI, what is clearly stated is that we have to make sure that we will benefit from AI financially, technologically, diplomatically, militarily. We need to develop this artificial intelligence. So when you look at those two things, you feel like there is something paradoxical. If you want something that is ethics, obviously you will be constrained. And if you will be constrained, you will not be competitive. So how do you deal with that, right? And the way we deal with that in the European Union is with trustworthiness. We've brought this word into the debate, saying, okay, we will just make sure that people will trust our product, then we will be able to sell them, and people will not question the legitimacy or the relevance of those systems. So it is really important to understand that ethics itself is, I would not say unuseful, but it's not enough. We need legal instruments, right? Whatever they are, they might be imperfect, because international legal instruments are always imperfect. That's not the point. We really need legal instruments, because if something is done that is not acceptable, that is misdeed, we will need legal instruments to sue people. Ethics will not be there to help us, right? If anyone do something that is unacceptable, ethics will not be able to do anything for that. So we really have to think about ethics as just one step towards something more formal. That would be legal instruments. We really need that. So basically, I don't want to take too much time on that. My points were that we are in a dead end with the debate and the narrative that has been created by the West, and we have to question the narrative, really. And I would, if you don't know about it, I would recommend that you start working, for example, on constructivism, social constructivism, just trying to understand how narratives will shape the behaviors at the very end. So we have to question this narrative. We have to question the hegemony of the West on ethical standards today, and we have to question them through maybe the opening to new perspective, let's say Western perspective, obviously, but most of all, we have to open to non-Western perspective on what is acceptable and what is not in terms of AI. And last, we have to think about ethics not as an end, but just as a mean toward a greater end, that is the law. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, my dear friend, Professor Emmanuel V, for your it was astonishing, so enlightening thoughts. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. And I will take some time to process it. Actually, I guess it's you could share with us all the things that are most difficult to establish concerning ethics. And I guess the most important thing is that we must to understand that there is a lot of cultural diversity in the world, and this cultural diversity in the world must be considered when we are developing AI tools. And sometimes, especially for us here in the West, in the East, the Western cultural are not so reachable. So thank you very much for this perspective, Professor Emmanuel. We must keep this in mind. Another thing that I love that you share with us, it's the necessity, the need of the law as a guide of AI. And despite the fact that AI tools in general are quite dynamic, but taking account that the law must to establish some important parameters for everyone who are now dealing with these matters, and that's quite difficult because not always, unfortunately, especially for us here that work directly with law, we do not have the complete complete understanding of every aspect of the engineering of data, engineering of developing systems based on AI, and this is quite difficult. I see a kind of similar situation when environmental law was a thing, and in beginnings, I'm talking about 60s, 70s or so, and for everyone in the law, we are not completely sure that all those aspects of environmental law and every ramification, every concept, and still nowadays there it is a thing. Most of students do not understand all the aspects of environmental law. The same goes for artificial intelligence and data engineering. We must be prepared to understand some ramifications, some aspects, some concepts, so we can make law better that fit and can be reachable to everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Emmanuel, for your thoughts. And I received a note here that Professor Flavio has an appointment, an important appointment. So I'd like to invite Professor Flavio, if he's still here with us, to share some fast thoughts, opening the discussion, open the round table, and then we are going to hear Professor PAOLA, and now on, I'm going to invite some of our members of this round table, and I'd like also to share some thoughts, but considering the time problems that Professor Flavio and also Professor PAOLA shared with me, I'd like to invite them, first Professor Flavio, then Professor PAOLA, to share these thoughts. Professor Flavio, thank you very much to be here with us. Muito obrigado, meu amigo, de verdade, é uma honra, uma gratidão, mais uma vez contar com você aqui conosco. Muito obrigado. A palavra é toda sua, meu amigo, pelo prazo mais curto, mas, por favor, compartilhe os pensamentos. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much, my friend, Professor Thiago. Professor Emmanuel GOFFI, it's an honor to be with you here, and also especially with all my colleagues here, all of them, important jurists and thinkers about IA. Well, Professor Emmanuel, I will make a fast, short consideration, and then I'll send you, I have a question to you about when I had already the opportunity to watch you in other lives and read some papers from you. And these questions are very important for those who work with human rights, like me, and probably with my colleagues here. In this sense, in my research field, I deal with human rights, and among many different aspects involved in this arduous segment of action of work, since historically permeated by different political views, artificial intelligence evidently imposes deep questions related to a possible, not to say probable, weakening of some historical guarantees and gradually more compromised. One of the concerns that I have that have been occupying my reflections, Professor GOFFI and dear colleagues, refers to the impacts on the democratic and pluralist basis of some societies. Indeed, you have mentioned a few minutes ago about this issue, especially regarding a new and discrete path towards an alleged exceptionalization of freedoms. In this sense, I would like to point out one of the dimensions involved in this context: the apparent voluntary submission of each individual and of societies in general to algorithmic systems, to the structures for storing information about each individual and about our content we produce by ourselves, the cloud, for example, and deliver, and besides that, we deliver free of charge information to big techs, in addition to allowing us to be clearly monitored in our personal, political, sexual, religious profiles, etc. If the so-called state of exception restricts individual and social rights under previously existing rules, with increasing state control over private aspects of each citizen, the presence of artificial intelligence in each dimension of our lives would not mean a new exceptional regime environment that has become the rule. For example, I remember the thinker, the philosopher, Giorgio Agamben, when proposing in his theory about the state of exception, he mentions two ideologically and temporally opposed thinkers. The first, Carl Schmitt, and the second, Walter Benjamin. For the first, sovereign is the one who decides on the state of exception. For the second, Walter Benjamin, the tradition of the oppressed people teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not an exception, but a rule. Another example, and I'm finishing my question, my reflection. Another example related to the possibility that IA could be considered a factor in trivializing the exception refers to the international humanitarian law. We currently have studies developed in relation to what we call the future war. I quote, for example, Professor Maureen Hibbert from the University of Calgary, Canada, a colleague of mine in the institute we studied in Canada, and who studies the military implications of artificial intelligence, the development of so-called autonomous weapons, the super soldiers, robots, the drones, and the unmanned bombings are factors that have simply been repeatedly violated the international law, especially the international humanitarian law. So my question is, in your opinion, Professor GOFFI, can we not currently identify the big techs and the artificial intelligence that in fact is controlled by them as sovereign entities in the manipulation of each individual, but with a much more refined and imperceptible efficiency by the citizens, nowadays psychologically conditioned? What kind of society we shall have in 2 or 3 generations regarding individual freedoms? Is it possible to think of an ethical and democratic path if each society, as you have just said, has its own views on ethics and democracy in the face of a global phenomenon like the IA? Are the sovereign state and their current laws capable factors to protect the liberties in the national and in the international legal orders? Well, these are my reflections, and indeed these are the issues that are taking my time, my worry, indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Emmanuel GOFFI. I'm really honored to have you here, and I'm really honored to have all my colleagues here. And please, my special consideration to my dear Professor Zélia, always my inspiration, and to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Flavio, my dear friend, for your thoughts and your questions. I don't know if Professor Emmanuel will consider to answer these right now, or just want to share another thoughts, and so you could make an synthesis by the end. What do you think, my dear friend, Professor Emmanuel?
I think that what Professor Flavio just told us is highly complex. So I will not be able to make a synthesis of what is said with what someone else would say. So if you don't mind, I just want to try to quickly answer that. That was really interesting. I think that we really have to put all that into a wider context. I do think that laws, but I'm not a lawyer, so you will correct me if I'm wrong. I think that laws, and especially international laws, are based on this idea of state sovereignty, right? That's the point. And those sovereign states have actually signed and agreed on, international treaties, etc., right? But what we've seen is that the world is more and more globalized. And what we've seen is that states are challenged by non-state actors that are as powerful as states. You were mentioning totally relevantly those big techs that we're talking about, the GAFAM, right, or the bad techs in China. Those companies are almost as important, or maybe as important as some states. If you look at some really small states, you can say that, yeah, for example, Google is more powerful than Liechtenstein, definitely, right? So those new actors do definitely have a strong impact on international relations, on human rights, because they are entering into something they did not sign treaties. I know that there are rules saying that laws, when they are accepted, they must be abided by everyone, right? But that's theory, right? We know that. When you were talking about lethal arms weapons, I've been in the military for 27 years. I know that there is a big difference between signing a treaty and applying it on the field, right? That's and we all know that it's not related to AI only. It's related to the fact that when you are defending your own interest, you always try to find loopholes and to try to overcome the rules, right? And to find ways not to respect the rules. We all know that AI is just a new tool to do that in an easier way. And AI, conversely to military that are in the hands of states, is not in the hands of state. It's in the hands of everyone and in the hand of companies. So obviously those companies will use that. I also want to say something that I think is really important. I was talking about Hannah Arendt and this idea of responsibility. Obviously it's about Second World War, dictatorship, etc. But the idea behind that is to say, we must not, because I think it's too easy, put the responsibility on the shoulder of big techs. You were saying, and that's true, that we are providing our data for free without even thinking about it. We have, as individuals, a responsibility in what we are providing to those big techs. So we have a responsibility in what those big techs will do with our data. And that's something that we forget. We forget that. I can say that for sure in most of the countries in the European Union, in Canada, in the US, because we are too hedonist and we are too focused on our individual well-being, right? So we don't care about what's going outside, and we don't want to make those intellectual efforts to think about what we are doing. We are really at ease with people telling us what we have to do, what we have to buy, what we have to watch, where we have to go for vacation, etc., etc., etc. It's really easy because what we have abandoned, philosophically speaking, it's our free will. We have abandoned our autonomy, not only with AI, but already with communication, right? With advertisement. We know that these tools are widely used. This is, if you're interested in philosophy, this is exactly what has been explained by Foucault with his governmentality, which is how to bring people to do things without violently forcing them, right? bringing them to accept things that they would not accept in another way. So it's all about communication, and AI is a new way to do that. AI is a new way in the end of norms entrepreneurs to bring people to do what they want, not what people want, right? But we have our responsibility. I have my responsibility when I'm sharing things on LinkedIn, when I'm sharing things on Facebook, right? Because I do not even think about it. So this is this point. When it comes to human rights, I think that it will be really, really, really difficult to have those rights respected in an era of artificial intelligence, and especially because those non-state actors do not feel like they're binded by international treaties, and because behind those big techs you also have states, right? Big techs works in a very huge environment. Google, Facebook, Amazon are working in the US, so they are tightly linked to the US interests, right? So when you take all that into account, it is much more difficult to have those human rights being respected today than it was the case 50 years ago, and it was already difficult 50 years ago, right? So I feel like AI, yes, definitely is putting a wedge in human rights, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to be really concerned about that, definitely.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Flavio. Thank you very much. It's I'd like to highlight something I guess Professor Flavio did mention, Professor Emmanuel. Professor Flavio is a great studier of indigenous culture, and this multiculturalism is quite on the blood of my dear friend, Professor Flavio. So it means a lot to all us, and especially in his case, who studied these matters, this subjective, this thematic with such importance. Thank you, Professor Flavio. Thank you very much for your thoughts. And I'd like also to invite here with us Professor PAOLA. Professor PAOLA Cantarini, as I announced before, will talk about some aspects of AI and COVID, and connecting it with AI and ethics that Professor Emmanuel GOFFI has just thought. Professor PAOLA, thank you very much, my dear friend, for being here with us, and the spot is yours.
Bom, boa tarde a todos. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de pedir desculpas por estar falando em português. Eu não me preparei realmente para falar em inglês, pela correria mesmo da semana. Acabei de defender minha tese essa semana em filosofia, então estava meio com a cabeça, inclusive, sobre Foucault. Então, a menção a Foucault por parte do professor Emmanuel foi muito, para mim, muito boa, porque me fez trazer algumas reflexões que eu gostaria de colocar. Então, primeiramente, cumprimentar nas pessoas do professor Thiago, do professor Zélia, os demais participantes, e trazer algumas provocações, algumas reflexões críticas. Eu sempre gosto dessa abordagem interdisciplinar, puxando para a parte da filosofia também. E eu trago algumas problemáticas para a gente refletir, né? Uma delas é que, com esse incremento, a gente vivendo na era do silício, que se fala não mais apenas internet das coisas, dos serviços, dos brinquedos, dos nossos próprios corpos, e essa ampla utilização e aplicação da inteligência artificial em todos os setores sociais, também estaria ocorrendo o quê? Me parece uma certa simplificação da linguagem, né, com a cyberoralidade, e uma possibilidade, talvez, da gente questionar se com isso poderia ocasionar até mesmo o fim do logos, né, essa linguagem mais elaborada, e até mesmo dentro desse logos a possibilidade própria do ser humano, que é realizar juízos éticos e morais. Como se daria isso, passando essa capacidade para a inteligência artificial? E algumas problemáticas também que me ocorrem de problematizar é essa insuficiência dos princípios éticos, que já foi citado pelo professor Emmanuel. Se fala até numa possível lavagem ética, então não é suficiente, por isso uma necessidade de uma regulação pelo Estado, mas também se critica muito os princípios jurídicos, se criticam as leis principiológicas, falando que elas também são insuficientes, e há uma problemática também que eu acho importante de destacar, que se cada vez mais na área de proteção de dados e inteligência artificial se fala da autorregulação, a regulação não por parte do Estado, mas a regulação pelos próprios interessados, os próprios particulares, e se fala até mesmo numa mudança de paradigmas nessa área, né, para uma arquitetura pela técnica, vinculando-se um novo paradigma para o direito nessa seara. Semana retrasada eu participei de um congresso que, dentro da área da teoria dos sistemas, com o pensamento de Niklas Luhmann, e lá se falou numa mudança de paradigmas relacionado a talvez uma nova razão imunitária para o direito, dentro da área do direito que eu coloco. Esse foi um tema que eu trabalhei no meu doutorado em filosofia do direito na Universidade de Salento, né, falando de uma mudança de paradigmas no direito, saindo da autopoiese e indo para uma lógica da autoimunidade, porque por esse perigo da autopoiese, né, tanto na linguagem, essa perda da autopoiese, essa perda da criatividade, uma construção que está sendo feita mais empobrecida da linguagem, né, com a cyberoralidade, e no próprio direito, uma possível perda da autopoiese no próprio direito, relacionada ao direito, o ser humano também, que é um ser autopoético, e o direito com essa característica da autopoiese, com essa possibilidade de perda por esse exagero de se ver o direito, compreender ou produção do direito extremamente ligado à técnica, ao pensamento extremamente cartesiano, vinculado à ordem, à medida, ao que é calculável, e colocando num lado de escanteio, digamos assim, a imaginação, a criatividade, a sensibilidade, que não são considerados, e dentro da autopoiese teria essa produção, e dentro dessa produção, esse aspecto criativo, criador do ser humano e do direito. Então, questionando também essa possível, vamos dizer assim, morte do direito, morte da autopoiese do direito via heterorregulação, porque nessas áreas de proteção de dados e inteligência artificial tem se falado muito dessa substituição pela regulação, pela arquitetura técnica, regulação pela técnica, e daí se fala das Privacy Enhanced Technologies, por exemplo. Então, trazer essas problematizações, né? Eu iria falar mais da Covid e problematizar a questão do estado de exceção, que já foi comentado pelo professor anterior, mas eu tomando como base a palestra do professor Emmanuel, me veio esses outros questionamentos que eu gostaria de compartilhar. E, para finalizar, né, já me endereçando ao final, eu destaco também um livro do Luciano Floridi, que eu tive contato, e me trouxe bastante reflexão, que é a lógica da informação, que ele defende uma construção de uma filosofia da informação, uma filosofia da inteligência artificial, que ainda está por ser construída, e ele fala que essa lógica vinculada a uma lógica de design seria baseada no quê? De vez da gente entrar para a lógica da representação, para a mimesis, que é toda uma crítica que, por exemplo, o próprio Foucault faz, né, do aspecto da representação como episteme desde a época clássica, desde Platão, né, com as suas ideias de cópia, modelo, desprezando a cópia imperfeita, e toda essa problemática em volta da representação, que abrange o pensamento, está dentro do direito, está dentro da filosofia, até mesmo nas artes, e Floridi vai apontar isso, e ele coloca a necessidade de modificação, de substituição da mimesis, da representação, que seria essa episteme dominante, para uma episteme construcionista poética, relacionada à inteligência artificial, e essa construção de uma filosofia da inteligência artificial, uma interpretação poética do conhecimento, no sentido de nós nos colocarmos como co-criadores numa posição mais ativa, e não apenas uma posição passiva de aceitar sem questionar e sem participar da construção, né, nesse aspecto de só reproduzir e não criar nada novo. Então, seriam essas as minhas colocações e reflexões, provocações que eu gostaria de trazer. E agradeço novamente.
Obrigado, professora Paola, minha amiga, pelas suas considerações. Professor Emmanuel, everyone who's watching currently now. Professor Paola defended recently, quite recently, in the last week actually, her doctoral in philosophy, and she's also a doctoral in laws. But recently, she is Ph.D. in philosophy, to say the least. She has a great curriculum, and she pointed some aspects connected with the loss of autopoiesis and the law, and then the language per se. And this loss of autopoiesis results on the loss also of the fluency and dynamicity of all the events connected with the language and AI. I'm quite being shallow here. Professor Paola was quite deeper than me, but I'm trying to net level everyone which has been presented. Professor Paola also pointed some replacement and creation over AI connected with human being, and this creation of new material by AI could be an opportunity to the human being per se to use this as a tool to be a co-creator with AI, not singularly a part of a reproducer of the system and what everything that is presented. I guess it's quite connected, what Professor Paola said, it's quite connected with the current cultural the dynamics that we here use, especially concerning humoristic memes. It came on my mind when Professor Paola says evidentiate this, because the meme cultural aspect is a simple reproduction and not something quite new. So that's why Professor Paola highlighted the question of poiesis as an important aspect that should be considered when we are talking about AI. It must be, we human beings must be co-creators as long as artificial intelligence to create something new, not be simply on the back seat. We must to guide the car at some point. Muito obrigado, professora Paola, pelos seus pensamentos. I hope that I could translate the most important ideas. I'm so sorry if it was so shallow, but at least everyone who could understand what was said. And I'd like also professors and all members here present to share some thoughts. It's quite important that I say thanks to everyone who is watching right now. I'm thrilled with all the persons who are watching. It's most qualified persons that I've ever could get in touch. Thank you very much, my dear friends. And Professor Marinilce Lacerda says hi from PUC. She's watching current by YouTube. Paulo Nunes de Moura, he says, Professor GOFFI, he says that your glasses are amazing, looks amazing, and if it is he's thinking and he's questioning if they are AI gadget or something like that. He's saying that, Professor GOFFI. Felipe Alvarez also is questioning regarding the problem of to build a normal law instrument. He quotes Professor Lawrence from Harvard that it is possible to build a law with computer code. He means to use a known code, a known codification to build a AI tool. It means to establish some laws in codification of AI. That's the question of Felipe. I guess, Felipe, at some point, it is quite possible to use some rules in AI tool. It's quite difficult to have some regulation of this construction, because the codification, it's not always easy to get, always easy to understand, but if there is some parameters that must be considering, especially on bias, it's probably for the best, and these parameters must to obey the law at some point, at some level. I guess it is so. I don't know if anyone could add on this question, but I guess it's the whole idea. Paulo Nunes also questions if the ethics and is social construction according to cultural context. Okay, and the same applies to law, right? Yes, Paulo, naturally the same applies to law. As much as ethics come from the society, law comes from the society also, and every sovereignty defines its own law. That's what Professor Emmanuel was talking about right now. Every country defines its limits from law application. It is quite so. Leonardo Sakahida asks, today we already have an eye that learns by themselves, and more this AI technologies evolves. Professor Emmanuel, he asks, do you believe that there will come a day when they accurately sufficient reason to the point of declaring independence for humans? Leonardo, Professor Emmanuel answered this question at some level in a recent interview that he gave to CEST. Professor Emmanuel would share some thoughts on these, if the AI will be independent from humans. Professor Emmanuel would answer this question.
Yeah, sure. Okay. The point was this is a big question that we all have about AI autonomy and AI that could at some point become a threat to human beings. I don't know. That's the point. I don't know. But what I know for sure is that even if the probability is really, 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 really low, we need to think about it, right? What I do not understand is those people that are just, saying, oh, that's just science fiction. That's not science fiction. And maybe in 20 years, that will not be science fiction, right? And even if it remains science fiction, we have to think about this probability, this possibility, right? We have to think about it right now to avoid it, right? I've heard lots. I mean, if you go back 20 years before, I would be sure that lots of things that are actually used in AI would look like science fiction for people, right? But it's no longer science fiction. Just look at what is done in the field of AI, and you will see that science fiction is no longer here. There's been this, Terminator syndrome at some point, fearing that kind of, T-800 should be a threat for us. And we are now working on that. We are now working on super soldiers. We're looking at this kind of robots that are used on the battlefield. So even if the probability is low, and even if it will happen in 50 years, 100 years, it doesn't matter. We have to think about this possibility. We have to think about it. We have to take a stance and say, we don't want to go this way. So what should we do in order to avoid this situation? Or because it's a societal, decision. You can say, okay, I'm totally happy to see those systems just, threatening or overcoming humanity, and then we can go there, right? But whatever we think about it, possible or not possible, or maybe possible in a really low probability, we have to think about it. We have to put that on the table. We have to think about it.
Nice, Professor Emmanuel. Fantastic. I share the same idea that it's no longer science fiction. It is something that is current on the society agenda, the government agenda, and it must be considered. Some of these idea was no longer ago science fiction, but today is no more. It must be really considered by everyone. Well, let's continue in the round table, and I'd like to exploring some ideas that Professor Emmanuel, Professor Flavio, and Professor PAOLA just shared with us. I'd like also myself to share some thoughts about this thematic. I will not be as deeper as I could go. These matters is quite significant and demands so much study here, but I'll try to synthesize for the best some considerations. The first thing that I'd like to share with you concerning AI ethics and law, it is the following. It has been shared so far that one of the major problems, one of the major problems in general goes with AI coding, bias, algorithm, big data access, and in general, this is quite important, labeling. I guess those thematics goes with such a strength so far, because if we have access on data and this data is poisoned by somehow, it is it has rotten by prejudice or something like that, the result on AI will be also rotten. I'm using strong words on purpose, okay? So the engineering data must consider to be full alert on this thematic, on these matters, and everything that Professor Emmanuel goes in this sense, in this meaning, that we must consider all the possible aspects, not only a Western or Eastern view, but a global, multicultural levels of view. So if you are now an engineering, a lawyer, a manager, and creator, and you deal with AI, and you are constructing algorithm, and you are constructing using bias, and you are labeling data, you must consider these probably distortions that society per se has. So your result will not be as rotten as some of this data that serves your AI. That's the first thing that I thought. The second thing, I guess it's a little bit more trickier than the first, and it concerns AI and especially AI and social networks and media in general. Well, the second thing is Professor Emmanuel has mentioned when he was sharing with us some thoughts. This thematic goes with quite aligned with the movie that I've mentioned sometimes at one of my posts, some of my posts on LinkedIn, the social dilemma, if I'm not wrong. In Portuguese, the title is O Dilema das Redes, if I'm not wrong. And this movie, this documentary, deals about how does the AI interferes with a social network. And this second aspect that I'm sharing here with you is directly connected with the AI use in a social network. Because when the AI is developed on these social network methods and platforms and sites and all those aspects, we must consider that this AI is programmed to be the most efficient to sell and to establish profits to the owners of that website and that social network. And in this sense, this AI uses and works and deals with some profound, I don't know if it is a biological flaw of human being. I'll not say that for sure, but there is some phenomena, if you prefer, that occurs in our brain, some chemistry that occurs on our brain that are quite connected with a social behavior of our species, our human being species. And these AI tools on this social media uses this quote flaws of human brain's chemistry and explore these flaws to engage these users to be and keep connected with these social networks. The question is, sure, it arrange profits naturally, but the question is ethical to use this disadvantage as a profit tool? I don't know. I'm now sharing some thoughts with you. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I'm saying it is ethical because legal so far. It is legal. There is no any chance so far that any social media would be illegal, but it is ethical to use this chemistry of the brain, human brain, as a profit tool. I don't know. I'm sharing this with you so you can share also your thoughts. And third and the last, and I will invite Professor, if I'm not wrong, Professor Marcos to share his thoughts. And the third aspect that I'd like to share with you also was brought by Professor Emmanuel during his exposition. The question, the problematic that involves responsibility of AI, liability of AI, to be more precise, because so far there is no complete AI on the matters on the world. So there is any computer that behave like a human being. There is not, at least not today, we are 2021, there is any machine that behaves like a human being, perfectly like a human being. There is so much machine learning and deep learning, but not the complete emulation of a human being. So who is responsible of these machine actions, of these machines eventually problems that will happen and will cause some damages? Who will be responsible? The machine, the computer, or the engineering team or the business corporation who developed it? That's the question. That's the question for the future. So far, in my view, on liability matters, without any questions, the responsibility goes, the liability goes for the company who develops AI, without any question. Today, at least, we cannot say that is the AI could be a subjective of rights, despite the fact that it came on my knowledge. Europe, and Professor Emmanuel could comment on this much better than me. It came on my knowledge that Europe also already have some regulations over kind of rights of the bots. I don't know if I'm not sure. I didn't research on it so far, but I heard someone explain to me that Europe already had some kind of guidance to machine kind of rights. I'm not sure if that is a thing. Professor Emmanuel, do you know anything about it?
Yeah, what I know is that we're working on that, definitely. So there is already some papers that have been written on that. So we're thinking about the next generation of robots, autonomous robots, and we are trying to see what would be their legal status. So there are rights for robots that are under construction in the European Union, right?
Fantastic, my friend. Well, I'd like to invite Professor Marcos Catalan, my dear friend, to share some thoughts here with us. Professor Marcos, thank you very much. Muito obrigado, meu amigo. A palavra é toda sua. The spot is yours.
Thank you. I would like to express my effusive thanks to the organizers of this conference, especially to my friend, Professor Thiago Avanci. And I'm truly pleased for being here among you, and especially also for the opportunity to listen and reflect with Professor GOFFI. I also would like to say that in this moment, I have the sensation that I am a turtle on a tree. Well, I will limit myself, because of it, to go through only one issue recently experienced by consumers in Brazil. I recognize that I only have skills to let me think about private law issues. But I guess that this is an issue that can be connected, that can be linked to ethical and juridic relations between suppliers and clients. In this context, in the context of my question, artificial intelligence is understood, of course, it is just a possibility, as a system able of making rational decisions without necessary intrusion of human beings, acting from probabilistic approach ruled by machines. Advancing in what I set out to do, I also believe that we all know that there are many possibilities when we think about artificial intelligence, good things. But at the same time, I do believe that the merits in this technological field can only be outshined by its intrinsic risks. My point is if these risks sometimes will damage human beings, not only the owns of these human beings, but themselves. If artificial intelligence systems are really able to identify the emotional state of the user, as I guess Thiago said in her second point, if artificial intelligence systems are really able to identify the emotional state of the user, analyzing the speed with which operators move their mouse, and yet to map unhappy people through facial recognition, it's feasible to assume that these systems may know us better than ourselves. With Professor David Sumter, I would like to remind that if we use Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, or any other social network, we are allowing our personality to be treated as a point in 100 of dimensions. Your emotions and our emotions are being nominated, and our future behavior are being drawn and predicted. And it is done automatically in a way that most of us can hardly understand. Also because there is no transparency in algorithms designed to be cloudy. What do I want to highlight? It was evidenced that behavioral studies demonstrated that human beings are not as rational as the modern civil law proposes, as the modernity proposes. In this context, can you imagine the potential to be exploited by artificial intelligence systems, in particular when we think about data-driven marketing, or when we think about consumer seduction and its connections with affect heuristic? Having it in mind, can we actually categorize these providers' behaviors as a kind of unfair practice under the law? And having it in mind, can we really classify these providers' behaviors as ethical behaviors? These are the questions that I would like to share with you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, my dear friend Marcus, for such insightful thoughts. Indeed, we do have more questions in this field that we have answers. And it's quite fantastic for us, at least for me, to realize that these thoughts are the same here in Brazil and Mexico and in France, in Europe, in America, in general, in the world, as Professor GOFFI announced and his exposition. I'd like to say hi, to say thanks, Professor Jos van der Wist. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, Professor Jos van der Wist, for your presence, for such fantastic audience. I'd like to say hi to Luciane Xavier, Sandra Cavalcanti. She shared with us some quite interesting thought, saying that people in general are dazzled by artificial intelligence and thinking that any algorithm is related to it, which is not true, since computer programming has been around for decades. She questions and concerns is about who will put limit on this power and that given to machine and deep learning. It's quite the same thing, Sandra, that someone asks earlier on this afternoon. It's kind of difficult, in my view, to establish some limitations, some parameters for programming, because not every programming language is quite accessible for everyone. It's not quite feasible to watch and to realize and to identify some flaws over programming. You know best than me, probably you're a programmer, I don't know, but I'm guessing you are connected with data programming, that most of programming are encrypted, so it's a step further on the difficulties of regulations of these matters. So it's quite difficult in general. But the law must be applied to everyone, and the problems probably will be reachable when the programming has been made, but the problems will reach everyone when the problem goes pop, okay? Just when it manifests itself on the society, and that's quite preoccupating, okay? Thank you very much for your question, my dear friend. So continuing on our conference, I'd like to invite Professor WENDOLYNE NAVA to share some thoughts that she'd like to manifest. Professor WENDOLYNE, thank you very much once more to being here. Gracias, amiga. Mucho gusto. The spot is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here talking about AI, ethics, and law in this magnificent event. I want to say thank you to Thiago for this opportunity. You are simply the best of the best, amazing human being.
My friend, your mic.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you, Emmanuel. I really loved your work and your lecture today. It was great. It was amazing. Thank you so much. And well, I think I'll agree that one of the complexities surrounding AI is ethics, of course. We know that ethics is not just about good and bad. Ethics can be a moral code, values, principles, ideals, standards, behaviors, value systems, virtues, dictates of conscience, and ethics means different things for different persons. That's for sure. And the problem is that ethics has the problem is that technology has no ethics and not in an autonomous way, that's for sure. So we are aware that ethics and technological is a really problem, and AI can be used in a beneficial way, but also in a harming way. For example, we are all familiar with a case in US with hospitals in the pandemic scenario. They developed an algorithm to streamline hospital bed assignment. And the decision was taken by predicting when patients will be discharged to free up a bed space. The idea was to increase efficiency and to improve the patient experience, but in a lot of cases was totally the opposite because it was found to be biased against Black people. There are other examples like the Amazon hiring algorithms. The bias was against women. We have the Compass case. What happened in all these cases? Well, it was human error because algorithms work with data and data is provided by humans. I think the good news is that AI is also evolving really fast, and it will continue to evolve to a point that AI can discriminate, even when ethics means different things for different people, countries, cultures, that's for sure. The problem is that real life example of discrimination is in artificial intelligence is just the tip of the iceberg in this important topic. AI not only has ethical implication, it's more complicated than that. What about impossible decisions, Emmanuel? I want to hear you. This idea of self-driving cars can reduce the number of deaths. It's amazing, but what if the car gets into a situation where he has to choose between protect the people in the car or protect the people outside the car? This is a really common example. This decision is not only ethical, it's also legal, social, economic, political, cultural, psychological. Who is going to take this decision? The algorithm? Roberto Szymanowski say, and I quote, "What is new here is that it's no longer human authority that will set and enforce rules. That will be done by AI. That will know better what is good for human beings. End of the quote. I think this example gives us a sense of urgency in this matter. How are we going to deal with complicated situations like this before it happens, not after something happened? If something happened, a judge is going to establish responsibility on case-by-case basis, but before, no? In 2015, AI experts warning us in an open letter called Research Priorities and Robust and Beneficial AI. They say our AI systems must do what we want to do. But who is this we? I was wondering, who is this we? When we talk about AI, who decides what is ethical acceptable right now? Governments and policymakers, yes, of course, they are starting to wake up to these important concerns, that's for sure. Our speaker today once said, and I quote, "The issue with regulation is that they must go along with formal sanctions, which disqualified ethics." But today he also said we need regulations. I agree. Natalie Muha said, and I quote, "Ethics and law both are necessary and neither sufficient. Moreover, neither can substitute the other. They act in a complementary way and they are able to inform and to inspire each other." End of the quote. Right now, governments are adopting national and international strategies. And I'm talking about soft law, and right now they are working in hard law. European Union is doing extraordinary work. Countries like Denmark, Finland, UK, Germany, Singapore, Japan, Canada, Dubai, they're doing something too. And I hope this produces a domino effect in other countries. In America, we are not way behind. Brazil, like always, is doing amazing stuff. Colombia is starting to do some stuff. Uruguay, Peru, and I hope soon enough Mexico, but we are way, way behind that right now. But they're not the only one. Who else is we? Who else decides what's ethical acceptable? Well, the truth is today AI is developed in a commercial world. Companies has the control. They are making the important decisions in every single matter, including ethical issues. Are they follow the national and the international ethical principles and guidelines? I don't know for sure. Probably not, because right now have a non-binding nature. In an ideal world, all companies most of the time do technological impact analysis when they develop AI algorithms. I hope so. Just like the governments and policymakers, most of the companies have a group of experts in different disciplines: ethics, philosophical, law, computer science, engineers, and also civil society representatives, like consumers. They have to make an analysis with a methodology to discover potential risk in every single algorithm and make decisions, ethical decisions, before it goes to the market. Not because they have to, because they want to be socially responsible. MIT Media Lab made an empirical study about self-driving cars with 13 dilemma scenarios. The analysis of the results from over 2 million people from 200 countries around the world confirm expectation that people will tend to save groups over individuals and the young over the old. So this means that will companies seek out a society with their other ethics and standards and legal regulations different from governments and policymakers? The question is, the future of AI will be determined by governments or by companies. I think we need a lot of social responsibility here. Last but not least, consumers. In this scenario, consumers is always a victim. And this needs to change. They need to stop being the victim and raise their voice because they have more power than they think. They have to stop buying things just because it's pretty, it's modern, it's cool, it's edgy. Before buying anything, they have to ask the right questions, and they have to be responsible for their choices. I think AI is making our world better, and we want technology continue to going forward. The reality is that we can stop AI because we have ethical issues, and we don't have a lot of time to get this right. I think we need a new form of social responsibility because AI has no friends. We are all familiar with the Stephen Hopkins quote, and he say, and I quote, "AI will be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last," end of the quote. He say it might. So we have hope. Who is we? Who decides ethics? Everybody, public sector, private sector, academics, consumers, we all have this responsibility, and we have to take it really serious. And I want to finish with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my dear friend, Professor Wendolini. Thank you very much. It's quite the problem to understand who indeed program these artificial intelligence and with which purpose they do it. So you highlight the main points. You highlight some thoughtful ideas here that we are so grateful. I like also, my friends, as you noticed on the chat of Zoom and also on the chat of YouTube, you could notice that I share with you the link of the interview that Professor Emmanuel GOFFI gave to us to CEST, and I'd like to invite you all to read this interview with some ideas that Professor Emmanuel has also shared with us on this afternoon. And also, Professor Emmanuel, I completely forgot, but Professor Emmanuel beginning his thoughts considering some new that most of us didn't have noticed. Brazil, I guess, yesterday, if I'm not wrong, or if not yesterday, on this week, during this week, Brazil has established a beginning of attempt to establish guidance on AI by government. I mean, it is not naturally in legislation, but it is a first step on these. I shared this link. If you look for it on the chat of the Zoom and on the chat of on the YouTube, you could find this link that connects with official Brazilian government, federal government site that could be seen and understand this project. I hope, at least I hope, this could help to regulate some aspects of AI use here in Brazil. Thank you. Well, I'd like to invite now my dear friend Professor Zélia to share some thoughts. Professor Zélia will comment over AI and social rights. Okay, Professor Zélia will share some thoughts in Portuguese. And my dear friend, I'd like to previously thanks my dear friend Patrici, I'm sorry, will make the simultaneous translation. So Professor Zélia will share some thoughts, and Patrici Zanon will make the translation following the thoughts of Professor Zélia. Thank you very much, Professor Zélia. Muito obrigado por estar aqui conosco nessa tarde. Muito obrigado, Patrícia, por estar aqui conosco, compartilhando seus pensamentos. Agradeço a vocês a disponibilidade. Muito obrigado, professora Zélia. É uma honra verdadeira, mais uma vez, tê-la conosco. E obrigado, Patrícia, por todo o suporte.
Obrigada a você, Thiago. Obrigada a Patrícia. Eu quero inicialmente parabenizar o professor Manuel e as professoras Paula, PAOLA e WENDOLYNE, bem como os professores Thiago, Flávio, Marcos, pelas suas manifestações, e parabenizo também, antecipo minhas felicitações também ao professor Paulo, que falará na sequência. Minhas considerações estão relacionadas aos efeitos da inteligência artificial nas relações de trabalho e, consequentemente, na proteção social. Como o professor Thiago mencionou, vou falar em português e, desde já, gostaria de agradecer à professora Patrícia, que fará a tradução para o inglês. Bom, então, feitas essas considerações, passo a falar em português, vou falar 1 ou 2 parágrafos, daí eu paro e a professora Patrícia fará a tradução para o inglês, para permitir que a professora lá do México, a nossa querida professora que conhecemos no outro evento, e também o professor Emmanuel, acompanhe, então, as minhas considerações. Os avanços tecnológicos, em especial o uso da inteligência artificial e aprendizagem automática, caracterizam a 4ª Revolução Industrial, também conhecida como Indústria 4.0. Esses avanços trazem praticidade, agilidade e um maior conforto para a realização das atividades. Também facilitam as conexões, a difusão de informações e a comunicação. Mas a distribuição dos benefícios corresponde, em pé de igualdade, à distribuição dos riscos. Embora representem progresso e desenvolvimento, a atual Revolução Industrial também agravou alguns dos problemas antigos. Patrícia?
Patrícia, se você está ouvindo, precisa acionar o seu mic.
Senão eu comento...
Vocês me ouvem agora?
Agora sim.
Sim.
Obrigado,
Okay.
amiga.
Imagina. So, the technological advances, and especially the use of artificial intelligence and the automatic learning, are characteristics of the 4th Industrial Revolution, also known as Industry 4.0. These advances bring practicity, rapidness, and a major comfort for the execution of activities. Also, they facilitate connections and the fusion of the information and communication. However, the distribution of the benefits corresponds equally to the distribution of the risks. Although they represent progress and development, the recent Industrial Revolution also aggravated some ancient problems.
Diferente das demais revoluções industriais, esta já tem demonstrado profundas e rápidas mudanças, o que repercute diretamente nas relações de trabalho e indiretamente na proteção social, já que prevalece no Brasil, assim como em muitos outros países, a proteção social com base na relação de emprego. Portanto, falar em ética no contexto da inteligência artificial exige também a análise na esfera social, porque mudanças mais profundas nas próprias estruturas da sociedade parecem estar em pleno desdobramento.
Differently from the other Industrial Revolution, this one already has demonstrated deep and quick changes, what really impacts directly in labor relationship and indirectly in social protection, ones that is still happening in Brazil and as well as in other countries. the social protection based on the labor relationship. Speaking about ethics in the context of artificial intelligence requires also the analysis in the social atmosphere. This is because the changes, the deepest changes in the structures of society seems to be really occurring right now.
É o que se pode perceber, por exemplo, com o aumento do desemprego e da desigualdade. Klaus Schwab, na obra A Revolução Industrial, na quarta Revolução Industrial, menciona que, ainda que as revoluções industriais anteriores tenham causado grandes ondas de desemprego, posteriormente foram sucedidas pela criação de novos postos de trabalho, dotados de novas características, e que isso também deve acontecer com a quarta Revolução Industrial. Mas a expectativa é que esses novos cargos exigirão um alto nível de especialização e, portanto, não resolverão os problemas dos desempregados não qualificados, criando uma classe de inúteis, nas palavras de Yuval Harari.
It is possible to notice, for instance, that the increase of the unemployment and the inequality. Klaus Schwab, in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, mentions that although the industrial revolutions that occurred before have caused big waves of unemployment, they were succeeded by the creation of new employments, which were characterized by new statistics. And this also must occur with the fourth industrial revolution. But the expectation is that these new employments will require a high level of specialization, and hence they won't solve the problem of the unqualified people, creating a new class of useless, in the words of Yuval Harari.
Se algumas ocupações serão extintas, as novas ocupações exigirão uma qualificação profissional que sabemos não está e não estará ao alcance de todos, especialmente nos países subdesenvolvidos e em desenvolvimento. A diminuição da capacidade de aferir renda levará ao aumento da dependência dos sistemas de proteção, especialmente no campo da assistência social. Esta realidade, inclusive, já foi observada pelo Instituto Brasileiro de Geografia e Estatística, pois, segundo o referido instituto, a partir de 2015, foi verificada uma diminuição na parcela dos rendimentos provenientes do trabalho e o aumento dos rendimentos provenientes de outras fontes, como benefícios previdenciários, aposentadorias e pensões e benefícios socioassistenciais. No caso do Brasil, benefício de prestação continuada e Bolsa Família. Deve ser ressaltado que... Eu vou esperar você traduzir, daí eu vou para a parte final. Está fechado o microfone, Patrícia.
Okay. If some occupations will be extinct, the new occupations will require a professional qualification that we know is not and won't be reachable for everyone, especially in the underdeveloped and developing countries. The decrease of capacity to acquire revenue will take the increase to dependency of the systems of social protection, especially in social assistance sphere. This reality, including, was already observed by the Brazilian Statistic and Geography Brazilian Institute, because according to this institute, since 2015, it was observed a decrease in part of the revenue that came from work and an increase from the revenue that come from other sources, such as the social benefits, like retirement, for instance, and the social assistance benefits also. So, for example, Bolsa Família, which is a benefit that we have here in Brazil. It must be realized that to execute the citizenship's rights, it is necessary the link between citizens and the state. And these require the citizens itself to maintain the estatal structure with several forms of taxation, which constitute a symbiotic cycle. The state collects the resources, the private resources, and make them public with expenditures in the limits of the law. So the rights are guaranteed and
Patrícia?
Eu vou falando então em português, depois ela volta a traduzir, pode ser, Thiago?
Perfeito.
Tá. E deve ser ressaltado que para o exercício dos direitos da cidadania é necessário um vínculo entre cidadão e Estado, o que exige dos próprios cidadãos a manutenção da estrutura estatal com várias formas de tributação, formando um ciclo simbiótico. O Estado coleta recursos privados e os torna público com gastos nos limites da lei. Portanto, os direitos são garantidos a partir do cumprimento dos deveres. O custo elevado de manutenção do sistema protetivo brasileiro, em especial o subsistema previdenciário, produz desequilíbrio orçamentário e financeiro, compromete a sustentabilidade dos direitos previdenciários para gerações futuras e a efetividade de outros direitos. Nesse contexto, talvez seja necessário repensar a estrutura do sistema de seguridade social como um compromisso ético. As escolhas nessa área devem ser tomadas com muita seriedade e compromisso, visando a implementação dos direitos de cidadania não apenas daqueles que interessam a corporações. Para instituir um modelo de proteção que efetivamente alcance as pessoas mais vulneráveis, deve-se analisar diversos fatores, dentre os quais os recursos necessários para sua implementação. Enfim, considerando as mudanças nas relações de trabalho que têm ocasionado um contexto de desproteção social, uma alternativa para garantir proteção social poderia ser a adoção de uma renda mínima, universal para todos, ou uma renda seletiva, para os que se encontrem abaixo de um padrão definido pelo ordenamento jurídico. Isso como forma de garantir o mínimo existencial e, com isso, a dignidade dos brasileiros. Isso certamente permitirá a concretização dos objetivos do Estado brasileiro, previsto no artigo 3º da Constituição, em especial o relacionado à redução das desigualdades sociais e regionais. Esse é um compromisso não apenas para agora, também deve ser pensado como forma de deixar o caminho estruturado para as gerações futuras, pois a garantia de direitos no futuro pressupõe a responsabilidade com os direitos no presente. Eu não sei se a Patrícia voltou, mas se não, o Thiago seria... Tá bom, então, ok.
Patrícia.
Mais uma vez quero agradecer, e agradecer principalmente a Patrícia por permitir essa tradução.
Imagina, professora Zélia, é uma honra poder ajudá-la aqui nesse momento e fazer a tradução, e uma responsabilidade também. E aproveito para cumprimentar todos os professores presentes na mesa, professor Thiago e os demais. Um grande prazer estar aqui hoje.
Prazer é todo nosso, Patrícia. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much for being here with us, so supportive. And please, if you want, continue on the translation of the speech.
Okay.
From Professor Zélia.
Okay, so continuing from where we stopped, this reality was already observed by the Geography and Statistics Brazilian Institute, and according to this institute, since 2015, it was verified a decrease in part of the revenue that come from work, and an increase from the revenue that come from other sources, such as the social security benefits, like the retirement. and the social assistance benefits also. Like in Brazil, we have Bolsa Família, for example. It must be stressed that to execution of the citizenship rights, it is necessary the link between the citizen and the state, what require from the citizens itself the maintenance of the state structure with several ways of taxation, which creates a symbiotic cycle where the state collects resources, private resources, and make them public with expenditures in the limits of law. So the rights are assured through the enforcement of the duties. The high cost of maintenance of the Brazilian protective system, in especially the social security subsystem, produces an imbalance, a budgetary and financial imbalance that compromises the sustainability of the social security rights to the next generations and the effectiveness of the other social rights. In this context, maybe it's necessary to rethink the structure of the security system as an ethical commitment. The choices in this area must be taken very seriously and through a commitment taken with the aim to implement the citizenship rights, and not only those ones which are the interest for the corporations. To institute a protective model that effectively reach the people who are more vulnerable, it must be analyzed different factors. Among all of them, the resources that are necessary to subsidize this implementation. Finally, considering the changes in the labor relationship that have caused a contest of lack of social protection, an alternative to assure this kind of protection could be the adoption of a minimum revenue, universal minimum revenue to all of the citizens, or even a selective revenue to the ones who find themselves under a pattern or a standard defined by the legal system. And this will be a way to assure the minimum for existence or to live, and then the dignity of the Brazilians. These certainly will allow the concretization or the execution of the objectives of Brazilian state, which is on our Article 3 from our Constitution, Federal Constitution, in especially the one related to the decrease of inequalities, social and regional inequalities. This is a commitment not only for now, and it also should be thought as a way of live the way structured for the next generations. Because of the rights to the future presupposes or even requires responsibility, liability with the rights here in the present.
Patrícia, eu quero te agradecer, Patrícia, professora Patrícia, e quero mais uma vez agradecer a organização como todo. Devolvo a palavra ao Thiago. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zélia. Muito obrigado, Patrícia. Thank you very much, Patrícia, for your efforts. It's quite important for everyone to have the whole idea that Professor Zélia, of Professor Zélia's thoughts and this connection with social rights and artificial intelligence are quite significative, and because it deals directly with 4.0 revolution, an industrial revolution that we are currently living on, and it deals directly with employment, it deals directly with social assistance and other aspects of this. Thank you very much, Professor Zélia. And I have 3 questions that I'd like to share with Professor Emmanuel, and then I'll share the spot with Professor PAULO so he can share his thoughts. Professor Emmanuel, I don't know if you would respond these demands, but Leonardo Sakahira asks, it's quite interesting, Professor Emmanuel. What are your thoughts about AI performing censorship over users' posts on social networks, social media? Do you think there is a nice thing considering freedom of speech? What are your thoughts about it, Professor Emmanuel?
Can you rephrase the first part? Is that
Okay.
the question about the use of AI in social networks?
Censorship and against freedom of speech, considering.
Okay. Actually, I would say that it depends, and I think that in some places freedom of speech is a kind of a huge right that cannot be violated. So when you accept freedom of speech, you have to accept freedom of speech at large, right? I don't feel like it is something that is desirable to have this kind of censorship by algorithm on freedom of speech. I don't think, because once again, basically algorithms that are behind that are biased, so you don't know if their censorship will be just or not. Right, so I don't see the point here, and especially because there are so many stupid things on this kind of social networks that at the very end you can censor everything at some point. So I don't feel the point with this kind of algorithm, and I mean I am in favor of the freedom of speech. People would not agree with me. That's not a problem. So I feel like when you accept that, you have to accept it fully. Whatever people will say, right? That's the point. Or you will accept that you are not accepting freedom of speech, that you're limiting this freedom of speech, which is no longer freedom of speech, right? So it's all about those words that we're using all the time. And I've lived in Canada for a long time, and in Canada there is this idea of freedom of speech, but when you live in Canada, actually this freedom of speech is pretty constrained by social expectations, by rules, and etc., right? So that's a stance. I don't have to judge that, but from my philosopher's opinion, it's not freedom of speech. Right, freedom of speech is like you can say whatever you want, right? So it's a stance that you have to take at the very beginning, saying, okay, we admit that freedom of speech is a right, is a universal right, and that must be respected. Or you say that freedom of speech cannot exist, so we have to constrain it, we have to put limits on it, and then that's another perspective.
Fantastic, Professor. Thank you. If anyone on this round table will share some thoughts, please let me know so I can share the spot. The second question, Professor Emmanuel, that I think it is fantastic, from Fernando França. He asks, according to your thoughts, Professor Emmanuel, it is possible to find the limits on trusting AI and on trusting people who build these programs. There is a limit, there is a limitation, there is a border that we must face between the programming per se and the programmer per se. Well, how do you see this aspect, Professor Emmanuel? I don't know if I could translate it well.
Yeah, it's once again, it's a matter of word. I just want you to understand that trust cannot be applied to technology. That's the first point that is really important. Then, if you look at trust on a sociological definition, trust means that at some point, because your knowledge is too low, is too insufficient to have certainty, you have to give trust to others, right? So my point is, if someone asks you to trust him or her, that means that you have an insufficient knowledge to make sure that your expectation will be met, right? So when someone is asking me, you have to trust the programmers, you have to trust the system, my point is to say, okay, does that mean that I cannot have any kind of certitude about that there is no certainty? So I'm still, you know, I think it's really a problem to use this word. This word is not applicable to AI. Trust is not something normal. Distrust is something normal. I've heard that in France. I don't know for Brazil or other countries, but in France, we are always criticizing there is a strong mistrust from the citizens toward, you know, public authorities. But that is the basic of democracy. Democracy is based on mistrust, not on trust, not on trust. When people are asking you to trust, you must be really aware that there might be something wrong behind that, right? Because trust is based on a really superficial or limited knowledge of what is the reality. When I take a seat on my chair, I'm sure it will not collapse. I don't need trust, right? So if I need trust, is that maybe someone just cut one of the feet of my chair, and that's problematic. So I really think that trust must be removed from the narrative around AI. You do not have trust. We do not have to trust anyone or anything. Mistrust is the basis for critical thinking, right? It is Cartesian doubt. You know, the Cartesian doubt by René Descartes is that you have to doubt things because it will foster your critical thinking. As soon as you start just trusting for the sake of trusting, you just abandon your free will, your autonomy, right? So don't trust anything, just check, double check, triple check, make sure that your knowledge is sufficient to make a correct stance.
Fantastic. Cogito ergo sum. Fantastic, Professor Emmanuel. I couldn't say best. It's quite interesting because trust is one shallow aspect, but knowing, scientific knowing something, it's go deeper, much more deeper than simply to trust, as you perfectly mentioned. The third question that was asked by Kavita Kanvilkar. I'm so sorry if I misspell. Kavita Kanvilkar. Probably she asks if European Union has given certain rights to bots, it's possible they held liability as well. As I mentioned, Kavita, it's quite possible. So far, it's quite difficult to ensure liability on this kind of AI, at least so far, because as Professor GOFFI mentioned earlier on this afternoon, AI is a tool. It's a mean, not an end. So as a tool, the responsibility, the liability does not goes for the hammer, but in the hand who uses that hammer. And that's precisely what we are discussing so far. If one day there is an AI self-conscious, an AI fully capable to understand, I guess, and I believe this liability could be shared. Professor Emmanuel, your thoughts?
Yes, just shortly, I just wanted to add something. Liability comes with sanction. So the big question is, how can you sanction a robot? How can you sanction an AI? Will you ask him to pay a fee? Will you put him in jail or it in jail? So if there cannot be sanction, there is no reason for liability. That doesn't make sense. So liability must be on real people, individuals.
Perfect. I couldn't say it best. And this is quite connected with the question raised by Felipe Alvarez. And he asks about Sophie and Saudi Arabia and South Korea bot, the AI bot, which has given citizenship on Saudi Arabia. I discussed these matters on a video and I don't know for sure when I talk about this, but I shared the link. But the whole idea of SOFI, at least on my view, it's more a political statement than a legal statement. It's kind of difficult, as Professor GOFFI brilliantly explained. It's quite difficult to understand all the aspects of subjective, giving subjective rights to this class of AI, at least even considering that SOFI is not a fully AI, a complete AI. It's a machine learning aspect of AI, piece of AI. So it's a tool so far, at least on my view, as far as I can understand it, it's a piece of machine learning tool, machine learning artificial intelligence. I don't know if anyone wants to share anything else, but if there are no further comments, I will share the spot with my dearest friend, Professor Paulo Campanha, who will now share some thoughts. Professor Paulo, thank you very much for being here with us. Muito obrigado, Professor Paulo. É uma honra, uma felicidade, gosto muito grande tê-lo aqui conosco nessa nossa tarde. E temos aqui representados todos os cantos do Brasil. Professor EMMANUEL, Professor WENDOLYNE comes from Mexico, and here in Brazil we have North, South, East, and West, all represented here in this conference. Thank you very much, Professor Paulo, for your presence, and the spot is yours.
Thank you, Professor Thiago, for this opportunity. I would like to congratulate São Paulo University and Mackenzie Presbyterian University in your name, the organization of this event. I would like to congratulate all my colleagues in the name of our national and international reference, that is Professor Zélia Pierdoná. It's a friend. We have a common friend, Professor Marcelo Bosch, that always told me about you. It's an honor for me with my colleague. I would like to excuse and to congratulate Professor EMMANUEL in his native language. Professeur EMMANUEL, je voudrais exprimer ma profonde gratitude pour l'apprentissage avec nous aujourd'hui. Pour moi, c'est un double honneur parce que je suis officiel de l'activité de l'armée brésilienne. J'ai passé plus de 28 ans en l'activité. Actuellement, je suis avocat et coordinador de maître en droit. Félicitations pour votre présentation et la gratitude pour l'apprentissage avec toi. And let's come again. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, we think about, we have a book that had published about carefully artificial intelligence. And one of his capture, he showed us two views about intelligence, artificial intelligence. I agree 100% with Professor EMMANUEL that you cannot exact definition about intelligence, artificial intelligence, but we have two views about this. We have a utopian view about artificial intelligence and a dystopian intelligence. In the first of all, we may see artificial intelligence helping to solve our problems, our climate change, our health, to reduce the accidents by car, by employees, and some others. In a dystopian view, we have Elon Musk, Steve Jobs. Elon Musk told us one moment, and carefully told us in his book, that the artificial intelligence is the greatest risk that we have in our civilization. And one moment is that artificial intelligence is something that you call from the evil into our lives. And the fact that I'm really in the middle of these two views, no so utopian, no so dystopian view. But when you talk and you think about artificial intelligence, and you think about machine learning and deep learning, when you think about deep learning, you have the big data. And the big data that Professor EMMANUEL, Professor Fábio told us, and others, we have the big text. We have a philosopher, we the name of the philosopher, Perry, Joseph Perry, one moment, Pierre Levy told us that the big text, the new states that in the world, and when you think about data, with big data, you think about our data, we think about our personal data and the data that we have. That when you think the fourth revolution, when we go that not only the people are connected, but the things will be connected to, and we are growing in this number of connecting, we grow is increasing because Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos is launching satellites to connect all the world. And what my wonder in this topic, because if you go to the past, not so far, in the middle of the last century, you have the Holocaust. And the Holocaust, I had the opportunity to go to Poland and to Birkenau to visit the concentration camp in Birkenau 1 and 2. And Birkenau 1, we have a lot of buildings. In one of them, we have a room. In this room, we have a wall with a frame with a European map that shows us how many Jewish people have sent from each country of Europe to Poland to Birkenau. And the final of last year, Carissa Vélez, a philosophy professor of Oxford University, published a book called Privacy is Power. And in her book, he told us that interesting date that was published in a book of IBM in Holocaust about Edwin Black, that we have two countries, Netherlands and France. And Netherlands has sent 75 Jewish people to Poland to concentration camp. And in France, we have 25 people has sent to concentration camp. And because one data, personal data that had in their country. In their country, both countries, Netherlands and France, years before the Holocaust, they have a census, a demographic sense of the civilization of their people. And in their land had a lot of detail of their people. And we have there, I had the opportunity to go to house of Anne Frank, and you go inside, you hear a voice of a child, and you're shocked with this feeling that inside. And when you go to France, and in Netherlands had a lot of detail of the people, of their people. But in France, we have a resistance movement. One of the leaders was Carmille by Edwin Black. And the pay slip and the form that has filled by the people, you have a lot of items that was filled by the people. And one of them was about their religion. And so the item number 11. And this item was blocked in this resistance movement. And only this data make the big difference by these two countries, that 25 people, Jewish people went to a concentration camp, in Netherlands 75. And we come back to our moments, and we are in other moments in our history. And we come back to nowadays, what we have that, like Professor Emmanuel told Professor Flavio, we have drones that is used nowadays, is used in battlefields, a drone that is used in delivery service of goods. We have robo soldiers in Canada and UK, and this is that make me reflection what the future we are going to. Only the events and research like this of ethics and law will make our future a safe place. Will make a safe path to the future. Because if we had in more than 70 years ago, we have this tragic moment in our lives, in our history, even though in our days when all of our data is under control. everything we buy uses credit card. But it's very important what Professor Manuel said, that ethics and privacy is a different view in our community. New Zealand, China, Africa, Brazil, Canada, United States. But the fact we have that we are more vulnerable than ever, because our data is under control of our big techs, and we know no one can predict our future if you go to a safety one or no. And it's one of my reflection to complement about our speaker is talking about in this afternoon, because I really wonder what's the path to go. We had in Brazil in a couple of months, more than 100 million people had hacked in its email. I had last year we have a just superior court stopped its work during 48 hours because we have a hacked action in the court, and it proves that it's proven for us that we are more vulnerable than we think that we are. And this is my concern about what the future we are going to, and all discussion of ethics and law to regulation to limit will make our future safety place. And on the other hand, I would like to make to share my wonder about our data protection in the context that I talk about, because in European we have GDPR, and the GDPR it's a new regulation in Europe, and Brazil had a LGPD that was last year, and even the chapter of the penalties is in force. But I had to read a data that make me concerned, that a couple of years in all Europe we have related that more than 10,000 cases of violation of data protection, individual data protection, but only more than 10 cases will have a monetary fine. And in this, for me, it's very, I wonder about, I'm very concerned about this, because I'm certain too that only an effective civil liability system may assure that our data will be protection. Not only, I read a paper of an interview with Professor Manuel, that's impossible 100%. But if you don't have a civil liability system, effective civil liability system, we more vulnerable than to have, because what we have in a few years, we have quantum computing and I have 5G to connect more than we are connecting. In 2016, WhatsApp per minute sent almost 20 million messages in 1 minute in 2016. Last year, 2020, we have 3 times more, 60 million messages per minute in WhatsApp. And it's our data, it's our lives. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Paulo. Thank you very much, everyone, for this wonderful afternoon. So much rich, so much fantastic exposition. So I have access on a great number of new thoughts, and I guess it reveals some new aspects, at least for me, I'd like to share. I guess the most interesting aspect that I could gain access on this afternoon came with Professor Emmanuel GOFFI, who shared with us the need to ensure multiculturalism on AI, making AI performing and AI engineering. This one wasn't on my mind, especially considering the European and Eastern tradition and against Western tradition. It is quite different for us to perceive the world, to understand the world as a multicultural experience. And this must be considered when we are dealing with AI tools, especially, as Professor Paulo just mentioned, especially considering that data is, without any questions, the big oil over the 21st century. I guess data is a commodity. You can say this without any questions, without any doubts. Today, data is the currency of the society, at least at some levels, and it must be regulated. And Professor Paulo just mentioned, Professor GOFFI, I don't know, I guess you mentioned these. I follow your post on LinkedIn, that Brazilian has suffered in January, I guess, 100 million personal data leak, and then leak and personal data and passwords, and then 210 to 200 and something like that on another link of personal data and passwords, etc. This reveals how deep goes this kind of marketing and transactions over under the society. This is quite something that we must be preoccupied with. Well, I'd like to share the spot for everyone. Say goodbye. We are now for over two and a half hours discussing these matters. Thank you very much, everyone who watched this conference. Thank you very much, my dear friend, Professor Emmanuel. Je suis absolument enchanté, mon ami. Merci d'avance. Merci pour votre disposition. And Professor Emmanuel, I'd like to invite you to share some final thoughts over this afternoon. Night in France, but afternoon here in Brazil. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. That was just thrilling. That's exactly what I was saying. We need this kind of event. We need to exchange. We need to discuss. We need to open our mind to new ideas, new perspectives, right? My own knowledge is so limited that I really need, and I guess we're all in this situation, that we really need to learn from others, right? Once again, we do not have to agree with each other. We have to speak with each other, right? And I really feel, honestly, that's thrilling. I've had a conversation with someone from South Africa, got a lot of discussion with people from India, from China, and now I have this discussion with you from Brazil, from Mexico, and really that is what we need. That we need that really, really, really. So thank you for organizing that. Sorry. Thank you for having me on board. That was a real pleasure, and I met really clever and really smart and insightful people. Thank you for all that. I will keep in touch, I'm sure, for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, my dear friend. Merci, merci. You are fantastic with some fantastic thoughts. And be sure, every door here with us are now open for any time that you want to share any more thoughts, any more ideas, any class that you want. I do believe in Mackenzie and also at CEST, both major institutions here in Brazil, those both most prestigious institutions of teaching here in Brazil, universities here in Brazil, are all with all the doors open for you, Professor. Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Professor WENDOLYNE. Professor Marco is now having some guest some well-guested, coisa linda, 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 lindo. É o filho, Marcos?
Filha, Ayla.
Oh, como ela se chama?
Ayla. Something
Ayla.
like moonlight.
Wow, it's so gorgeous. God bless her. And Marcos, want to say some final words? It's on you now.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you, my dear friend. Wendolini wants to say some final words. The spot's on you.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege. I really love every single talk and lecture. It was amazing. And Paola, congrats for your new PhD. I really admire your work. You are so smart, really, really smart. Congrats. Thank you so much. I see you later.
We all do, Wendolini. We all do. Professor Paola, my dear friend, thank you for being here with us at this late. I know you do have some other appointment, but I'm so happy that you could manage. Professor Paola wants to share some thoughts. Final.
Thanks so much. It was amazing. It was a great opportunity to have this conversation. Thanks for the words and the opportunity to be here with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, my dear friend. Before I share this the spot with Professor Paulo and also with Patrici and Diego if they want, and naturally my dear friend Professor Zélia, I'd like to clarify now. Ajish Mullah, I'm sorry if I mispronounced it, but Ajish is asking about the report. Ajish, please, considering to gain access on the site, the hot site, there is a link on the YouTube, and there is a link on the hot site which are posted in every art and published material. Please consider to access this, and there is a guidance to how to do the report. The hot site has a field, a proper field to make the report. You can make report on your native language. There is no problem about it, and in a few weeks, I hope, we will certify your attendance here. Okay, it goes for everyone who wants the report, the certificate. Okay, it is necessary to go to this hot site and send us the report of this event. Please be sure that today is April 10, and you have until tomorrow, Sunday, April 11th, to send me on this link this report. All the rules, all the guidance are on the hot site. Please be attended of this. Okay, and now Professor Paulo wants to share some final thoughts, then Professor Zélia, and I'd like also to invite Diego and Patrici to share also some final thoughts. Professor Paulo.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Thiago. This opportunity is a big honor for me to stay here with Professor Zélia and other colleagues now. Merci beaucoup, Professor Emmanuel, por aprendizagem avec toi, and à bientôt. And thank you, everyone, to this opportunity.
Fantastic, Professor Paulo. It's quite significant for all of us because you're on a military perspective and law perspective. You are a fantastic colleague, research colleague, and I'm so proud to have get in touch and know you, Professor Paulo. Thank you very much for being here with us. And we are, Professor Emmanuel, we are all going to fly a Mirage, such I guess yourself I do believe. I don't know if you're a pilot, but in the Air Force, we are all Mirage fanboys, okay? And Professor Zélia, please, your final thoughts. Professora Zélia, muito obrigado. Suas considerações finais.
Eu que agradeço e quero parabenizar a organização como um todo, né, agradecer a oportunidade de incluir o Mackenzie nessa discussão. Eu quero comunicar também que está sendo instalado o Centro de Pesquisa Aplicada à Inteligência Artificial no Mackenzie e provavelmente nós vamos nos reunir novamente, né? Então, já, assim, e envolve toda a universidade, vai ser interdisciplinar, não só um olhar do direito, mas um olhar interdisciplinar, que é o que eu acho que exige, né? E eu quero dizer que estou à disposição de todos, né, para tratar, porque, embora eu tenha pesquisado as questões relacionadas à inteligência artificial, eu sempre olho sobre a perspectiva da proteção social. Eu mencionei no meu trabalho, né, toda essa realidade nova que tem surgido e que nós vamos ter que ter a responsabilidade, né? Quando você fala em ética, a ética também como recebedor da proteção estatal, porque a proteção estatal é concedida pelos próprios cidadãos, já que eu mencionava do dever, dentre os quais a tributação. Quero agradecer e parabenizar cada um dos professores, em especial o professor Emmanuel, né? Diferente do professor Paulo, que, né, poliglota, fala francês, inglês, eu falo italiano, espanhol e português, então estou assim, mas eu gostaria só, Thiago, que tu fizesse uma tradução, porque eu imagino que a Avanci me entende, né? O espanhol é muito cerca, já estivemos juntos, mas daí, se você quiser falar assim brevemente, inclusive noticiar esse centro do Mackenzie, meu muito obrigado e mais uma vez parabéns ao Thiago e aos organizadores.
Obrigado, professora Zélia. Professor Zélia asked me to translate something to you, Professor Emmanuel, and to everyone who is currently watching. And she was thrilled on this afternoon to be here with us and to have some thoughts. Her research was mostly on social rights and naturally how does the artificial intelligence aspects interfere with social rights, and this is quite interesting for her. And in institutional speak, she shared with us that Mackenzie Presbyterian University are currently now opening an AI research center. And this is quite fantastic new. I didn't know it. And it's fantastic because it will not be singularly focused on law. It will be a multi-level, area, I guess, multi-areas of knowledge that will be part of this center, which is fantastic. Professor Zélia was, Professor Emmanuel, my supervisor during my PhD, and Professor Zélia is current my supervisor also on my postdoc with Professor Ângelo Viglianesi Ferraro, de la Universidad Mediterránea de Reggio Calabria, and Mediterranean International Center for Human Rights Research. We all, Professor Emmanuel, we all here on this round table are a part of this postdoc program, and it's fantastic. I do when I'm researching these, Professor Zélia knows best. I try my best to ensure that law talks with engineering and statistics and some aspects. That's my postdoc my postdoc work. I try my best that law is quite connected with engineering. Well, that's the case. We are here. We cannot talk like an hermetic matters on this subject. It's not possible anymore. We must to talk about AI and all these aspects connecting ethics, law, engineering, science programming, and everyone, so we can talk the same language. This is also a multicultural aspect that you brought to us, Professor Emmanuel. I guess everyone just share. I forget someone. Now, Patrici wants to say something in this final thoughts. My dear friend, thank you very much for your help in all the event. I'd like to thank you, Patrici, and like to thank you, Diego. Also, you are some quite special for all this event could happen on the way that happens. Thank you, Patricia. The spot is yours.
Thiago, I would like once again, first of all, to greet all the professors in here, especially Professor Emmanuel. It was a pleasure to hear all the thoughts that were shared here today about a very interesting and recent topic that needs to be discussed. So it was an amazing opportunity. And I'd like also to thank you, Thiago, for the invitation to take part in the organization of this event. It was also very
Patrice.
Very interesting, and many points are always here for sharing events and any kind of activity, academic activity you were interested in. Not only you, Thiago, but all the professors in here. So that's it.
Thank you, my dear friend. Professor Flavio, as I mentioned, couldn't be here with us. Thanks so much, but he recorded in final words I'd like to share briefly. It's kind of fast. Please. I'm sharing now. I'm sorry, I didn't share the sound. Oh, Jesus. Just 1 second. Once more. Now, I guess, let's see.
Well, thank you, all of you. Thank you, my friend, Professor Thiago, for this invitation, as well as to Professor Emmanuel GOFFI. We are very happy and honored to have you here, sharing with us your thoughts about artificial intelligence. Especially, I'd like to thank to all of my colleagues here, important jurists and thinkers. It's very important to all of us understand that artificial intelligence is a reality, is a hot topic presented in all aspects of our lives. This AI must be understood also in relation to its consequences, moral, legal, ethical consequences by each individual and citizen in our society. Thank you very much for this important opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you, my dear friends, once more. After 3 hours of our event, I say goodbye to everyone. I was saying Professor Emmanuel, today, Saturday, it's feijoada days, and here in Brazil, and as we know, France goes with a fantastic champagne. So today was feijoada and champagne day. Thank you very much, my dear friends, to all you. I'm so proud of everyone. Be safe. See you next time.